Fauvism was one of the first major avant-garde movements of the 20th century. It emerged in France around 1904 and reached its peak between 1905 and 1907, although its influence continued well beyond those years. Rather than following a strict artistic program, Fauvism brought together a loose group of painters who shared a desire to free color from its traditional descriptive role. The movement takes its name from the French word les fauves, the wild beasts. The term was coined by the art critic Louis Vauxhall after visiting Room 7 of the 1905 Salon d'Automne in Paris. Surrounded by paintings filled with bold, vivid colors, he reportedly compared a classical Renaissance-style sculpture displayed in the room to Donatello among the wild beasts. Although intended as a criticism, the label was quickly adopted to describe the movement. Fauvist artists rejected the idea that colors should imitate nature. Instead, they used pure, highly saturated pigments to express emotion, create visual intensity, and strengthen the composition. Rather than mixing pigments on the palette, Fauvist painters, Vlaminck in particular, advocated the use of paint straight from the tube, favoring pure unmixed colors over carefully blended tones as part of their expressive approach to color. A tree could be painted red, a face green, or a sky orange if these choices enhanced the overall effect of the painting. The immediate reception of Fauvism was sharply divided. Many mainstream critics condemned the movement as anarchic, violent, excessive, and even insane. More sophisticated critics, however, argued that beneath its apparent disorder lay an excessive reliance on theory and intellectual reasoning rather than genuine artistic freedom. The movement's bold use of color quickly became one of its most controversial features. Critics denounced the Fauves' harsh, raw, and highly saturated colors, arguing that they were visually aggressive and unnatural. This led some reviewers to accuse them of merely coloring in, splashing, or smearing their canvases instead of truly painting them. The American writer and art critic Gelett Burgess vividly captured this perception in 1910 when he wrote that the Fauves had stolen sunsets and rainbows, cut them into squares and circles, and hurled them raw and bleeding onto their canvases. As a result, Fauvism was frequently described as garish, childish, primitive, barbaric, vulgar, and savage. Ironically, these criticisms echoed the very nickname Les Fauves, or the wild beasts, that had given the movement its name. Fauvist drawing was equally defined by the simplification of forms and masses, stripped of unnecessary detail. The compositions often feature broad, energetic brushstrokes, flattened areas of color, and strong outlines. Rather than creating the illusion of realistic depth through careful modeling or perspective, they emphasized the two-dimensional surface of the canvas. This approach gave their paintings an immediate, spontaneous appearance. Henri Matisse summarized this philosophy by stating, "The whole is our only ideal. Details diminish the purity of the lines, they harm emotional intensity." Rather than faithfully reproducing reality, Fauvist artists sought to maximize the expressive impact of the overall composition. Fauvism was influenced by several earlier artistic movements. Like the Impressionists before them, the Fauves initially drew inspiration from their predecessors while sharing the same desire to move beyond them. Instead of capturing fleeting effects of light and atmosphere, they sought a more direct and expressive use of color. The Post-Impressionists, especially Vincent van Gogh, Paul Gauguin, Georges Seurat, and Paul Cézanne, had demonstrated that color could be expressive rather than merely descriptive. The bright non-naturalistic palette of Gauguin, the emotional intensity of Van Gogh, the structural innovations of Cézanne, and the decorative qualities of Neo-Impressionism all contributed to the development of Fauvist painting. Maurice de Vlaminck in particular was profoundly affected by the major Van Gogh retrospective organized in 1901. From around 1905 onward, Van Gogh's influence became unmistakable in Vlaminck's energetic brushwork and powerful use of color. The summer of 1905 marked a decisive moment when Henri Matisse and André Derain worked together in the Mediterranean village of Collioure, south of France. There, Matisse radically transformed his approach to color. Although inspired by the expressive freedom of Van Gogh and Gauguin, Matisse did not assign fixed symbolic meanings to colors. Instead, each color was chosen according to its role within the composition and its ability to express the artist's response to the subject. Rather than forming a unified school, Fauvism emerged as a network of interconnected practices. Artists such as Henri Matisse, Albert Marquet, Charles Camoin, Kees van Dongen, Louis Walta, Jean Metzinger, Robert Delaunay, and Henri Le Fauconnier contributed to a broader exploration of liberated color, which would later feed into Cubism, Orphism, and other modernist movements. Around 1904 to 1906, other artists such as Georges Braque, Raoul Dufy, and Otto Fries explored the industrial landscapes of Le Havre and other northern port cities, such as Antwerp, where they translated ports, docks, and factories into simplified compositions built on strong color and reduced forms. These northern environments introduced a colder, more structural dimension to the emerging Fauvist vocabulary. In the south of France, particularly in L'Estaque and La Ciotat, Braque, Derain, Dufy, and Fries further refined this visual language. The intense Mediterranean light led to increasingly simplified architectural forms and a growing emphasis on geometric construction. In 1906, André Derain extended Fauvist experimentation to London, where he painted the Thames and the city's bridges under a dense atmospheric light. Here, color became less about Mediterranean brilliance and more about urban mood, demonstrating the adaptability of Fauvist principles beyond the southern landscapes. However, although Fauvism is often associated with landscapes, the movement also included portraits, still lifes, and scenes of everyday life. The subjects themselves were generally conventional. What made these paintings revolutionary was not what they represented, but how they represented it through bold color and simplified form. From 1906 to 1910, Fauvism gradually declined. Henri Matisse and André Derain moved from the peak of Fauvism toward a more structured, synthesis-driven style, heavily influenced by Paul Cézanne. For Derain, works like The Bathers and his landscapes of Cassis and Martigues showcase a transition towards structural solidity, geometric masses, and a more sober color palette, ochres, dark greens, and thick black contours that foreshadowed Pre-Cubism. Meanwhile, Matisse focused on large figure compositions and nudes, such as Le Nu Bleu, Souvenir de Biskra, which shocked contemporary critics with its expressive, forced anatomical distortions and radical abstraction, bridging the gap between sculpture and painting. The artistic trajectory of the movement culminated in La Danse 2, a masterpiece of extreme simplification, flat color planes, and raw contours. Matisse reduced his palette to rhythm, blue, green, and vermilion, creating a luminous harmony that critics slammed as a demonic cacophony. Yet, it also marks the moment the movement was transcended. By 1908 to 1910, the Fauves as a cohesive group no longer truly existed, with most artists like Derain having moved on. Georges Braque became one of the founders of Cubism alongside Pablo Picasso, while Henri Matisse continued to explore color and decorative composition throughout his career. Because Fauvism never established a formal organization or written manifesto, it gradually dissolved as its members pursued individual paths. However, around 1910 and 1911, the distinction between Fauvism and emerging Expressionism, particularly the German group Die Brücke, remained blurred for many artists, including Robert Delaunay and Wassily Kandinsky, who often treated the two terms as nearly synonymous. Some art historians, notably Jean-Claude Liebenstein, have therefore argued that Fauvism should be understood as a broader European or even Western phenomenon. While it developed primarily in France, related forms of Fauvist painting also appeared in Germany, the Netherlands, Prague, Russia, Switzerland, Finland, and even Canada. Indeed, the shockwave of pure color quickly spread across Europe, giving rise to highly identifiable Fauve hubs or directly influencing other avant-garde. Even before this explosion, a broader spirit of chromatic liberation was rising in Scandinavia, particularly through the raw and vibrant canvases of Edvard Munch in Norway, whose emotional use of pure color patches advanced in parallel to the French Revolution. Among the main epicenters of Fauvism outside of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands were at the forefront. Brabant Fauvism in Belgium, arguably the structured movement closest to French Fauvism, was centered around Brussels and featured highly colorful scenes of everyday life, yet with a softness and luminosity that sometimes differed from the pure violence of the Parisians. Meanwhile, in Amsterdam, the Dutch Luminists, including the young Piet Mondrian and Jan Slijters, pushed color into electric non-naturalistic registers deeply echoed by the radical Parisian works of their compatriot Kees van Dongen. Further east, Central Europe ignited with the same intensity. Hungarian Fauvism in Budapest, driven by numerous Hungarian painters studying in Paris during the 1905 scandal, who assimilated this revolution to create a powerful local Fauvism-inspired movement that later structured itself in 1909 under the name of the Eight. Almost simultaneously in Prague, another group of avant-gardists, also named the Eight, embraced this violent color palette, rapidly merging it with an angular geometric tension that pioneered Czech Cubo-expressionism. They use color to convey their inner experience and states of mind, thus achieving a unique synthesis between Fauvism and Expressionism. In Germany, the Fauve aesthetic directly collided with the Expressionist wave. In Dresden, the founders of Die Brücke shared the same cult of unmixed color and raw stroke as the French masters, though they infused it with a sharper urban psychological anxiety. In Munich, the Der Blaue Reiter circle, led by Wassily Kandinsky and Franz Marc, and including Russian-born master Alexei Fonavlensky, adapted Matisse's lessons into a mystical, highly colored art characterized by intense, heavy outlines enclosing brilliant jewel tones. In Switzerland, Kuno Amiet and Giovanni Giacometti brought a luminous, pure color approach to alpine landscapes. In Scotland, the group known as the Scottish Colorists absorbed the Parisian lessons firsthand, bringing back an explosive palette to the British Isles. Even in the far north, Finland felt the impact through the Septem group, which finally broke away from dark romantic nationalism in favor of pure bright light. Further east, Russian neo-primitivism and the beginnings of the avant-garde in Moscow and St. Petersburg were deeply nurtured by Fauvism, notably thanks to the immense collections of Matisse paintings visible in the private galleries of the city. The Jack of Diamonds group, founded in Moscow in 1910, famously blended this French color violence with traditional Russian folk art and popular woodcuts. This stylistic broadening of the movement was already reflected in contemporary criticism. In 1910, Galette Burgess, that we mentioned earlier, published a survey entitled The Wild Men of Paris, in which he applied the label wild beasts to virtually the entire Parisian avant-garde, from Henri Matisse to Pablo Picasso, proving that the borders of this wild spirit were fluid from the very beginning. This broader understanding of Fauvism also helps explain why artists such as Wassily Kandinsky and Paul Klee later regarded Fauvism and Cubism as two complementary branches of Expressionism. In this interpretation, Fauvism explored the expressive possibilities of color, while Cubism explored the expressive possibilities of form. Despite its brief existence, Fauvism had a lasting impact on modern art. It demonstrated that color could move beyond strict imitation of nature and carry emotional and compositional meaning. This radical approach influenced later movements and helped pave the way for many forms of 20th century modern art, in which artistic expression took precedence over faithful imitation of nature. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, subscribes, likes, and boosts are welcome to support the channel. Thanks for watching.